Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Dominic Mills podcast. I apologize for the long break. I know it's been a while since you guys have heard my soothing voice. Life got a little crazy for a bit. I should be back posting mostly weekly. We're in the middle of a great NBA playoffs. We've got a couple really intriguing conference finals between Boston, the Heat, Golden State, and Dallas. Football season's getting closer and closer, so we're gonna be back on our grind. I've got another great guest today. Dr. Kristen Eccleston has a doctorate in education in mind, brain, and teaching from Johns Hopkins University, a Master of Science in Special Education from Johns Hopkins, as well as a certificate in educational leadership and administration from Hood College. Dr. Eccleston was the creator and former director of the Enhanced Social Emotional Special Education Services program for Montgomery County Public Schools and was a Montgomery County Special Education teacher for over 15 years. She is currently an adjunct professor at Towson University in their secondary and special education graduate programs. Dr. Eccleston has worked on extensive research examining adolescent mental health impairments in the educational environment and is well versed in the needs of the neurodiverse brain. She is also the host of the Neurodiverse Teacher, a mental health podcast for Neurodivergence. We discuss her life, work, mental health in the school system, and much more. But first, let's blast that intro.
Samuel cuts it back. Ohio State wins. Barrett looks, fires, touchdown Buckeye. Oh my goodness! Barrett Rozier! How do you do? Cousins, Ohio State, look out! And you don't like that? You don't like NBA basketball?
Okay, we are welcoming Dr. Kristen Eccleston to the program today. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. So, who would you say is Kristen Eccleston?
Oh, that's a really great question. And it's kind of a complex question. I feel like I'm 37 years old and I'm just now starting to figure out who Kristen Eccleston is. And I think part of that was I'm ADHD. I was undiagnosed up until I was almost 30 years old. And I think so many people with ADHD tend to be people who have masked in their life to really try to work at being able to fit in. And so I think now that I know that and understand that, I'm figuring out who that person is. But I know right now, at least in this moment, I am somebody who is a champion for mental health, especially in our youth. Just my own things aside, that is something that I have observed, something that I see a great need in, and something that I am very passionate about.
Okay, that's awesome. I think ADHD is like the most commonly undiagnosed mental health hurdle that we have. I have two siblings with it. How would you say that is afflicted and affected your life throughout your life?
No, it is. So a lot of females, especially females my age, who when we were in elementary school, when ADHD would have been something that was more prominent, it was really focused on little boys who were hyperactive, in and out of their seat, drawing attention to themselves in the classroom, versus little girls like me who were more of the daydreamers. I used to get on my report card all the time, like, oh, so lovely to be in class, but needs to focus more, is a social butterfly. And it was because the hyperactivity wasn't something that was happening outwardly. The hyperactivity was something that was happening in my head. Like thoughts were going on in my head all the time. Conversations were going on in my head all the time. If the teacher wasn't engaging, then I was thinking about other things that were more exciting to me. So I think that's why so many females have gone undiagnosed, is we were much better at kind of masking, and we just seemed like we were really social and just not paying attention. We were the daydreamers, essentially.
Okay, yeah. What do you think has caused that discrepancy in terms of how it's perceived and how it's seen today?
I think a lot of the discrepancy goes back to like I said, little boys were very obvious. There's that hyperactivity
Hmm.
type of ADHD. So it's kind of my mom always used the terminology, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? And I think little boys, in a sense, were the squeaky wheel. And just to be fair, it can be vice versa. Girls can be hyperactive, boys can be inattentive. It's just kind of a known more predominantly through boys to be hyperactive. And so I think the discrepancy was they brought the attention to themselves. Little girls didn't. Little girls were the ones who were able to sit quietly. And then when it came to testing, it just seemed like, oh, they weren't trying as hard, or they were spaced out, or they were daydreaming. And they just didn't equate it because we weren't the squeaky wheels. We weren't engaged, and we were having struggles, but we were really good at sitting in our seat, not bringing the attention to ourselves, and masking essentially not to bring that attention to ourselves. So I think that's why there's a lot of that discrepancy. And I think a lot of things like social media now, where we're finally starting to say, hey, I do this, or I experience this, or this has happened to me in my life, and other people are going, wait, me too, has finally kind of started to bring to light, and people are kind of connecting the dots and realizing that these weren't just weird quirks or traits. There's actually something more to what was going on or what they experienced growing up.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned social media. I think it's been really interesting to see, like, in the last like 5 years or so, especially. I feel like social media started out as like a venue for everybody to like brag about like how perfect they were, how great their life was, and a lot of times we're seeing now people are being really open about like their mental health experiences, and like they'll joke about a lot of the stuff that they go through in a way it's like it really humanizes them, and
Mm-hmm.
it hasn't really always been seen that way. A lot of times it's been demonized.
And I think it's beautiful because I think we finally have a platform where people are going, I'm not alone. Okay, it's other people are going through this too. Other people are experiencing this. It's not just me. I'm not weird. I'm not like crazy. Like other people have experienced these things too. I've even seen TikToks where somebody was like, I like to just sit at night with like my arm up in the air and just like sit like this for an hour. And then next thing you know, there's like 100 people are like, me too. And I think it's great because these oddities, right? People felt
Hmm.
so alone. Like, I do this and I know it's weird, but they're like, no, it's not. Like, I have other people, there's other communities of people who've been doing these same things and are just also shy or didn't want to bring to light, like, I know I do this weird thing, but other people are doing it too. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think there's drawbacks to social media. I think, how it started off with a look at my perfect life and this is
Hmm.
unrealistic, and I think a lot of that has contributed to mental health aspects that we're dealing with. But I also feel like on the flip side, there has been this community aspect that has been created as well, and allowing people to not feel as alone or feeling more connected to others.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned that. And you talking about holding your arm up against the wall. I actually sometimes I'll lean with my back on the wall of like my bed behind me, and I'll just stick my legs like straight up in the air. Like it stretches my hamstrings, but the feeling, I'll just sit there for a while, and I'll have like no grasp of time as it goes by. Um, I see you've devoted a large portion of your life to your studies, including a litany of degrees. Which degree has meant the most to you?
I think, and it's not just because it's the highest degree, but I think my doctorate meant the most for me. It was not something that was easy. It's not like I breezed through it by any means. And I think the reason why it meant the most to me was I was a student who struggled a lot in high school. I didn't even get to go off to the college I wanted to go to until the spring semester, because I didn't get in until the spring semester because I had really bad grades. I had really bad SAT scores. So I really didn't look at myself as being academically inclined. If anything, I didn't think I was that smart. I felt like I was always trying to fight to hide that I wasn't as smart as my peers. I never wanted anybody to realize that I didn't learn the way everybody else was, or that I was having the struggles that I was having. And so I think my doctorate meant the most to me just because that was kind of my moment in being like, you are really smart. You
Hmm.
do have abilities that you didn't realize that you had. I think if I could travel back in time and talk to my high school self and say, look at what I accomplished, my high school self wouldn't believe it. And I think that's why it's meaningful to me, because it's like I proved to myself that I had a capability within me that for so long I never thought was there, and I didn't think would ever be there.
Yeah, that's really powerful, especially when you used to have those feelings about yourself. So what inspired you to pursue the this field?
So it's funny how life happens. Like sometimes I think you get put on this random journey and it's like you're just going on this ride. Like I said, I've always been ADHD. Even when I didn't know I was ADHD, I was still ADHD, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do at 18, even in college, going off and studying, right? I think my mom was like, "Why don't you study communications?" And I was like, "Okay, that sounds good," because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I did. I studied communications. I was setting myself up to have a career in broadcasting or journalism. And I came out of college, I had my degree, wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was working in PR at the time. I wasn't super fulfilled with what I was doing. And an opportunity to go back to school and get my master's in special education came up. And it was from Johns Hopkins. So I felt like, okay, that's a bonus too.
Hmm.
And so I took it. I became a special education teacher in the county that I grew up in and I went to school through. And I never realized how much I would be passionate about it. I never realized how much that would shed light on who I was as a learner and some of the experiences I had. And I never realized how much I would love working with teenagers, like just love working with teenagers who were struggling in school, who were having difficulties in school. I felt like I was able to use a lot of what I had experienced in high school and relate to the students that I was working in are working with. And I feel like as a teacher, you try to hope that you go and you get one student that you feel like you made a difference in. And I feel like I am so blessed and so lucky that I at least have 5 or more students I could name who, if I wasn't at least impactful to them, they were impactful to me. And I
Hmm.
just love and adore them. I'm even thinking like I'm looking across my office right now and I just have pictures of students lined up in frames still. And I mean, some of them are almost 30 years old or 30 something years old at this point in time, if that ages me a little bit. But I just am still so proud of them and loved the work that I did with them. And ultimately, in my career as a special education, I had an opportunity to start a new program, which is not a common thing, but I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I got to be in the creative seat of creating a program for students with special needs. And when I was going through that process, what I ultimately decided I thought was needed was a program for students who were really impacted by mental health needs. And that program started off on the first year with 5 students. And by the 5th year, we had 58 students and a waiting list because we were already almost 20 over what our capacity was for the program. And I had never anticipated that it would blow up in that way. I just felt like there was a need. I didn't realize how much of a need there was. And it was through that work that I ultimately decided to go back and get my doctorate, focusing specifically on what does mental health look like in the education setting, because there was such a need. I mean, and this was pre-pandemic too. So what could be done for these students to really help them be successful and really go out and face life feeling confident about who they were as not just a learner, but as an individual.
Okay, that's really awesome. So, what would you say is the state of mental health for students, especially in those special education areas, like throughout the age groups, like elementary, middle, and high school?
So I can honestly say, so part of what I do right now is I am an education consultant. So I work with families and specifically with families of students with mental health needs. And I can say the state of mental health is probably pretty poor right now. And elementary through high school, it's not just impacting our teenage students, it's impacting our little guys all the way down to kindergarten, first grade. I mean, students who are dealing with suicidal ideation and hospitalizations, and we're talking second or third grade, which is really impactful. And these were students who I would say probably had some needs going on before the pandemic, but I definitely think the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of what we are seeing. I think some of our younger students missed some critical social skill learning time. I think some of our older students were in isolation for a period of time, and some of the mental health needs just exploded or became more impacted than they previously were. So unfortunately, I think the state of our mental health of our youth is poor, and there's a lot of reasons. There really isn't. I've had people go, what do you think the reason is for it? And there isn't. There's so many rabbit holes we could go down of what's causing it. Is it social media? Is it the lack of communication? Is it the pandemic? Is it a larger sense of awareness? Is it the way people are parenting? I mean, you could go down so many different factors that there isn't just one to put your finger on, but regardless of what the factors are or is, it's still an issue, and it's something that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be addressed, because we have to remember that our youth are eventually going to become our change makers, our people
Mm-hmm.
who are in charge, our people who are making decisions for us as a society. And we want to make sure that we set them up for the best, because ultimately it will impact everybody.
Okay. You mentioned how the isolation specifically, I feel like that's been a huge factor because I don't know, I went back and forth on this before the pandemic, but we really are social creatures. Like we're meant to interact with each other, even if you're the the introvert that doesn't like to talk to anybody, you're still used to being around everybody and hearing all the conversations, even if you're not necessarily a part of them.
Mhm.
I have a younger brother who is a sophomore this year, and he's been severely like affected with it, like going from completely in person to all online for a while, and now like back, they're like kind of at school, kind of not. It's really weird. He's at a point where I think he's like the only one that's still wearing a mask,
Mhm.
and that comes with its own things.
Mhm.
So what would you say it means to be neurodiverse?
Oh, I love that question, because I think being neurodiverse is just honestly a different way of thinking. I think we've created this mindset that being neurodiverse is a disorder, because most everything has the word disorder associated with it, right? Attention deficit disorder, sensory processing disorder. If you're dyslexic, then that's a disorder that you have, and I don't think of people who are neurodiverse as having a disorder. I don't think of autism as a disorder. I think of it as a different way of thinking. I think of people who, if you think in history of people like Einstein, or even current day people like Elon Musk, those are individuals who are neurodiverse, and their different way of thinking is what's brought about new technologies or new discoveries. And I think a lot of our youth who are neurodiverse are also a lot of our youth who are dealing with mental health needs, because we've made them feel like there's something wrong with them. There's
Hmm.
something different about them, because the way that they're thinking doesn't fit in this one size fits all box that we've created in society, or even in our education structure. Like, you go to school and you learn this way, and this is the right way to learn, and this is the only way to learn. And I think it leaves a lot of our neurodiverse individuals feeling bad about who they are, feeling self conscious about who they are, thinking I'm different, there's something wrong with me. And then I don't think that that's true. I think that these are actually some of our brightest individuals in our society, some of our most talented youth who would be our world changers, who would be our individuals who could cure cancer. But we've hindered their confidence in themselves by saying, you have a disorder, or you don't think right, when really they just think different. It's not that
Hmm.
they are right or wrong in their thinking. They just have a way of seeing the world in a bigger aspect than just inside this little box that we've created. So to me, being neurodiverse is just being able to kind of span back and see a bigger picture than the little picture.
Okay. I found it interesting how you mentioned there are a lot of really successful people throughout history, really, that have been seen as what we can call neurodiverse. Like they've just had a completely different, outside the box way of thinking in terms of their entire life. I don't know if what do you think contributes to that is the question I want to ask here, but do you think that outside the box thinking allows them to achieve that? Because a lot of times those people are also like tortured on the inside, or the torture genius trope. Um, do you think that that may contribute to that feeling kind of misunderstood by everybody around them?
I do. I think that these are the people who are, I think there's a couple factors at play, right? You're having these thoughts, these ideas, who maybe sometimes in history, it's not till 100 years later that we go, wow, that person was really smart and they were onto something, and we're giving them the credit and celebrating them, but they weren't around to get to experience the credit. And if at the time it was just they're that crazy person who's just spouting out these ideas. So they got to miss the accolades that came along with their discoveries or their thoughts. And I think more in present day, even too, you have people who are really smart who still get a lot of pushback and are being told like, oh, you're crazy, or that's a weird idea, and then also feeling bad about themselves because people are telling them like, oh, that's weird, or what kind of idea, or that's crazy, because they're thinking outside the box, they're seeing things differently. And people don't like change. That's a natural thing with the brain. We don't like change, right? Change is scary. Our brain's main job is to keep us alive, to keep us safe. And so even if we're in a situation that's not a great situation, our brain goes, you're alive, so I did my job, so let's not change things up because I want to just keep you alive. And I think that that kind of mindset is what keeps people from embracing new ideas or embracing change. And then those people who have these new ideas are made to feel bad, again, made to feel like they have a disorder, that something's wrong with the way that they're thinking. And so I think that's where you get that kind of tortured soul aspect, is
Hmm.
that they've just been kind of shunned or made to feel bad. And a lot of neurodiverse tendencies tend to have like ADHD has rejection sensitivity dysphoria with it. So I think neurodiverse individuals are so attuned with feelings and what's going on around them that they're very sensitive to that feedback too. It's very hard to take some of the criticism that comes with the fact that they think outside the box.
Okay. I think that that's really powerful. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. You saying some of those parts at the end kind of made some of the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. So going back to in the like a school atmosphere, what would you say the difference is between an internal and external student behavior?
Sure. So to me, the easiest way to describe it is I'm going to go back to that squeaky wheel aspect, right? Your externalizers are your students who maybe the root cause of the feelings are all the same. It's coming from a place of anxiety, it's coming from a place of depression, stress, whatever it is. But the way that you're showing that emotion is you're showing it outwardly. You're flipping a desk, you're cursing, you're ripping up papers. You're becoming very obvious in the way that you're processing your emotions, versus an internalizer might still be having anxiety, depression, feelings of panic, whatever they might be, but instead of outwardly showing that, it's happening inward. They're shutting down, they're putting their head down on their desk, they're not interacting with their peers, they're just quiet in the back of the classroom. Maybe their grades are declining, but not declining so much that it's raised a red flag to anyone. They're almost the ones who are able to kind of like back up into the darkness, and just nobody captures them. Nobody realizes that stuff is going on until they hit that wall of either the suicidal ideations pick up, the self-harm picks up, they stop coming to school. It almost has to get so bad before somebody finally realizes, oh, I think something's going on with that student, because they were able to kind of suffer in silence essentially,
Hmm.
versus those who are suffering outward. And to me, those are the biggest differences between an externalizer and an internalizer. And I love them all. I love all of my students in any capacity, but I think my biggest crusade has been for my internalizers, just
Hmm.
because they're the ones who are easily missed. They're the ones who don't have a lot of programming or options available to them at school, because I feel like it's only just now that people are starting to even realize that they exist and that there's something that needs to be done for them.
Yeah. I really like how you articulated that. My mom was a parapro at an elementary school for a long time, and whenever I would go visit her, you could really see the difference in the external behaviors and the internals. Like there'd be the kids that are really rambunctious, just bouncing off the walls the entire time. The teacher's pulling out her hair, trying to get them to sit
Mhm.
down. And then there's the kid that's sitting in the corner, not saying anything to anybody, but still their brain's doing the exact same thing anybody else is doing. You say something to them, it takes them a minute or two to respond to you. How do you think we can set up the school structure, especially at those early ages, for kids in those different venues? Would they ideally be put together like the internals and the internals, or do you think that it's just as important that they are consistently integrated together?
That's a really great question because it's kind of a complex question. I think there's a couple of things at play. I don't think it's a yes, they need to be together, or no, they don't need to be together. I think for your students who are externalizing students, they benefit more from being with students who I would say are not internalizing students, or more of your neurotypical students, right? Are not reacting in any kind of way, not internal, not external. They're just your neurotypical, I'm here for school type of student, right? The externalizers do best with them because they do best with seeing that as a model in their peers. I think a lot of externalizing students actually do better. I hate saying it in this word, but for a lack of better words, like almost of a peer pressure of seeing that modeling from their peers that this is the way I should be in school. They do best with that. I think actually separating them out and just putting them in groupings of just externalizing students is not beneficial because they just then see the behaviors, their similar behaviors in their peers versus seeing the modeling peers. However, on the flip side, I think your internalizing students actually don't do well when they're with the externalizing students because of that sensitivity piece I mentioned. They actually take a lot of that inward and it scares them and they don't respond well to it. And I think it actually shuts them down a little bit more. And I think historically we've done that. We've just said, okay, there's a mental health piece going on here. And it doesn't matter if it's external or internal, there's just mental health. So let's just put them all together and then we'll give them services because of that mental health piece. And you can't do that. Yes, the root cause could be very similar, but the manifestation being as significantly different as it is has to be taken into consideration because in my experience, my professional experiences, when the externalizing students are having a moment, it really is detrimental to the internalizing students. It really sets back some of the progress they've made. So it's that's why I said it's not just a yes or no separate question. You almost have to really program for the externalizing students and individualize the programming for the internalizing students.
Yeah, and I think that that's got to be a really difficult line to toe because a lot of times when it's at its worst, a lot of these schools don't necessarily have the resources to be able
Mm-hmm.
to help these kids out in a productive way that really benefits everybody. It's like you said, they're all just kind of thrown in together, and then there could be the clashing of those different personalities.
And that's one of my biggest frustrations with, I think, school systems is because you're right. They don't have the resources, they don't have the programming to be as individualized or tailored. And unfortunately, what happens a lot, especially in the public school system, is there's a law, it's called FAPE, Free and Appropriate Public Education, which means that if a school system cannot meet the needs of a specific child, then they have to pay for a private placement to meet the needs because they are obligated to provide a free and appropriate public education. And I think what a lot of these school systems don't realize that if they would get creative in their programming and how they structured the programs that they offered, it would actually be a money saver to them to have these programs in place rather than having to pay out the millions of dollars they do in a given year for the private programmings that they have to provide to students in their school system.
Okay. Um, I guess this kind of plays into that. How would you say that the classroom setting impacts students' ability to learn?
I think that we, again, even for neurotypical students, we have too much of this one size fits all. We're still
Hmm.
working in this old, I call it the old operating system, right? Where we're still lining everybody up in little rows, the bell rings, we're teaching everybody how to be great little factory employees, right?
Hmm.
And we have moved well beyond that. We're 200 some years beyond that, right? We're not structured the same way. Our society isn't the same way. Look at an automobile 50 years ago and look at it today, right? Then look at a classroom 50 years ago and look at it today. Not a lot of change there. So we're making progress in so many other areas, but not in how we are delivering education, despite how much more we know about the brain and how individuals learn. And so I think one of the biggest detriments in the classroom right now is that we're not individualizing the learning. And I think people think like, oh, we're going to individualize it for every kid. We can't do that. That's too hard. But I disagree. I feel like there are things that can be done, that can easily be done to help support students' needs. And in education, they talk a lot about equity and being equitable. And to me, that's equity and being equitable. Equity doesn't mean equal. It doesn't mean everybody's getting the same thing. It means that you're getting what you need as an individual to be the most put in the most or best positioned to be successful. And that's what equity is. And so we've got to start teaching kids like this kid gets this accommodation or this resource because that's what they need to be successful, but this kid isn't getting it not because it's not fair. They don't need that to be successful. You're trying to make sure that everybody's on the same or equal playing field to set them up for success. And that's providing them with opportunities for, if I only need to do 10 of my math problems to show my understanding versus I need to do 20 to really get the concept. Like, we have to look at how are we tailoring and individualizing learning to make sure that students are getting what they need to be successful.
Why do you think that there has been that lag? Because it's not like there hasn't been the research in how these different neurodiverse situations affect like how students learn in that one size fits all system. It's like you said, cars have changed so much in the last 50 years and classrooms haven't really changed so much. Like there's just smart boards, and
Mhm.
honestly I've been out of school for a little while, so I don't want to say I know everything that's going on, but in general it hasn't really changed that much.
Mhm.
Why do you think it has been like that, and what do you think it's going to take to get it to where it needs to be?
I think it's been like that because change is hard. Change is not overnight. I think you have a lot of people who are in the education profession who become stagnant, or this is the way we used to do it. I also think you have a lot of people who are some of your policymakers who've never set foot in a classroom, who are not realistic about what it takes to educate students. There's a lot of power that's been taken away from teachers, the people who are really most inclined in knowing how students learn and how to best deliver the curriculum, and nobody asks their opinion. People who have either been removed from the classroom for so long that their their experiences are really no longer valid, or people who have never set foot in a classroom are making decisions that are impacting the education system. I also think that a lot of times we roll out half-baked ideas like no child left behind, or some of common core curriculums, or different things that it's okay, there's an issue, we need to fix it, let's roll out this idea. Okay, we haven't thought through it all the way, but we got to get it out there because we've got to start making some change. And then it gets out there, it was half baked, it doesn't fail, it doesn't work, and instead of sticking with it and fixing it, they just roll out the next idea because okay, that
Hmm.
one didn't work, so let's get the next one out there. So I think that's a lot of what has hindered change and a lot of what has impacted the school systems. And in all honesty, I think what's going to make the change, I think, is already in play. It hasn't happened yet, but it's in play. And I think the pandemic has a lot to do with it. This school year, particularly, you have seen a lot of teachers who have left the profession mid year. My gut tells me that you're going to see even more teachers who are going to leave at the end of this school year. It's like they were just sticking it out till the end of the year, and then they're going to exit. Prior to the pandemic, there had already been, I think, roughly like a 40% decline in college students lining up to become teachers. There was already a teacher shortage. There continues to be a teacher shortage. I think there will continue to be a teacher shortage because you have people who are seeing these teachers have not been treated great and they're not getting
Hmm.
paid a lot of money. Why am I going to want to do that? And so I think this shortage in resources is almost going to have to force change. It is really going to have to force change because you're not going to be able to operate the way that you used to. Now, I think anytime there's change, it always gets worse before it gets better because there's a period of time where people aren't sure what to do or what the answer or what the solutions are. So I would imagine the next 2 to 3 years will probably be very transformational for the education system, and the fact that there is going to be this gap of how do we fix this issue, this shortage of resources, these people not wanting to be teachers, maybe having to even simplify what some of the qualifications were in the past for teachers just to make sure that there's enough bodies in classrooms. But I think eventually people are going to go, this can't remain, this is a
Hmm.
problem, this is an issue. And that's when you'll start to see change. I don't know what that change looks like, but I'm at least hopeful that that will be the time for people like me, for people who are also invested in education, to step up and be like, this is what it needs to look like going forward. This is how we're going to fix this issue. And this is how we are going to get our students what they need to be successful.
Okay, I really like how you said that. I think that the loss of teachers is something that is not really been talked about enough. I've had a couple friends who are teachers that have told me that that they've left or that they are planning on leaving this year. So I really appreciate you mentioning that, because they talk about oftentimes how difficult it is to get the support that they need to do a lot of the stuff that, like, they're just kind of asked to do, and there's not like a budget to do that, or like the resources to handle a lot of this stuff. And there's all these different types of students and stuff that are dealing with problems that we haven't really necessarily thought of having to deal
Mhm.
with before. We're using a lot of the the themes and the ideas to fix problems that we used like in the 70s that were, they worked then because there wasn't as much
Right.
coverage of everybody.
And that's one of the biggest problems is we haven't taught teachers how to deal with some of the things that they're dealing with. There's this expectation that almost that you're not just a teacher, you're a parent, you're a social worker, you're so many different roles, but teachers haven't really been given the skill set to be able to navigate that. And then you also even have some teachers who go, that's not my role, that's not why I'm here. So I feel like there's
Mhm.
some can't even say the word. There's some ambiguity. I can't say it, but you know what I'm saying.
Ambiguity.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
I need that help sometimes, but
it's
there's
okay.
some of that going on too, right? If people aren't sure, is this my role? Am I supposed to be stepping in? Am I not supposed to be stepping in? So I think you have that going on. I think you have teachers who, mental health is one of those things where either you know about it, you've studied about it, you've been exposed to it, or you have your own personal biases, or you know what media has told you, or what you read in a magazine article. So there's discrepancies happening there. So I think there's a lot of factors at play, and teachers just aren't equipped with, and not to any fault of their own, but not equipped with the skill sets that they need in order to do their job. And then with so many people quitting or leaving or whatever the circumstances are, it's created a little bit of a vicious cycle, right? Where there aren't enough resources. So the people who are left standing are keep putting more and more on them. And that's got to be impacting their mental health and their well-being too. And I think that even then starts to drive even more people out. So we've created a vicious cycle that's going on right now too. And eventually something will have to be figured out on how we're going to navigate that and how we're going to get ourselves out of that one.
How do you think parents can better equip themselves to help their children go through these challenges that are coming up now?
I think just being attuned with your child, being aware of it, making sure that if you need to access an outside provider, you're doing that. If you need an education consultant, you're doing that. That you are just doing what you can to help support your child, to be an advocate for your child. And it really creates a catch 22 situation that's going on. I work with so many families who are frustrated with the school system, and rightfully so. They are frustrated. Their child isn't getting what they need to be successful. Their child isn't getting the supports that should be in place. But I think sometimes too, it's not so much that the school has stopped caring or they're not wanting to give supports to this child. I think it's that they don't have it. It's not available. And I think some of what could help the situation is a little bit more transparency, a little bit more communications. But I think a lot of schools, for whatever reason, are afraid to admit what's going on. I don't know if it's they're afraid of lawsuits, they're afraid of just putting it out there for everyone to know. But I think that we've unfortunately created these issues. And so parents need to know that I think there are times when the schools are doing their best and want to do right by your child. They just don't have the resources to do it. But I also understand as a parent that that's all fine and dandy, but I want the best for my kids. So there's a
Mhm.
little bit of this no man's land there in the middle of how do we fix that and how do we bridge that back together.
Do you think that disconnect may lead a certain percentage of families to decide that homeschooling is the best option for them?
I think so. I've worked with a lot of families who have been so frustrated that that's what they've ultimately decided they're going to do. They go, I can't deal with this anymore. I can't deal with this frustration, or the school's not listening to me, or I'm not getting what I need for my kids. So I'm just going to homeschool them. And I will admit, I homeschooled my daughter for a little bit during the pandemic, not so much because I had any issues with the school. She's also ADHD, and just virtual learning was not something that was working for her, and so that was more why I stepped in to do it. But I don't know that I loved the fact that she had to do homeschooling, and I'm not anti-homeschooling. I think it's great for some families. I think that it is great for some students particularly. I think some people have it down to a science, to a T. They get involved in programs, they get involved in different shares, but I don't know if just doing it as a last resort is the best decision, especially if you yourself are not versed in teaching, if you yourself think
Hmm.
that I still am somehow going to maintain working while homeschooling, because it really is, as a parent, has to become almost your full-time job, and making sure that your child is getting the information that they need to learn. So it definitely isn't a decision that should be taken lightly. I believe in public education. I truly believe in education. I think it's just broken right now. And I say right
Hmm.
now because I think not I think I there's hope for the future. It can be fixed. We just have to, I think, stand up together and make the change and say there has to be a change, and use this kind of this moment of brokenness, of not having enough resources, of not having enough teachers, to really be open to listening to people who have the ideas and the voices to try and put these puzzle pieces back together, and hopefully in a manner that makes it a much better outcome and takes us from being that old operating system into a brand new operating system that allows us to be a powerhouse of education worldwide again.
Yeah. I feel like we talked about it a little bit earlier, but a lot of the stuff that gets rolled out now feels like it's kind of like a band-aid on a situation, and then they're like, ah, that didn't work. Let's try this, or that didn't work. Let's try this.
Yep.
I feel like sometimes this, along with some other problems in our society, it's kind of like they're just like, wait for these kids to grow up, then it's their problem. They'll
Yep.
figure it out.
Yeah. No, and it's true. We do that. We do that all the time. And then we wonder why we have prison issues, or we wonder
Mm,
why we have poverty issues, or we wonder why, we have a generation with this issue or that issue. Like, and it's because that it's like we want to wait until they are old enough to figure it out or deal with it. And that's not a solution to a problem.
yeah. Um, Something that I read in your thing that really interests me is your thought process on school avoidant students. How do we support those school avoidant students?
So that was one of my areas of success when I was in the public school system, was getting students who were school avoidant to get back to school. And it's something that I currently work on now. And I have people ask me all the time, oh, like, what's the magic secret? And there really is no magic secret. One of the first steps is relationship building and establishing a relationship with the student. I had no problem, along with the social worker who was part of the program that I worked in, going out to students' homes, establishing relationships, making it so that they felt like they could trust me. And then I also was in a position that I was allowed and able to provide a different type of environment. A lot of the times, my school avoidant students were just overwhelmed by the idea of being one of thousands of students within a building. And even though I was in a comprehensive building, which means there were thousands of students, I was able to be in a position where I had my own entrance. So students didn't have to navigate being ones of thousands. They were one of 3 to 10 students in a class. So they were able to really connect with teachers. And this was all going on within a comprehensive building. So it was all about setting. And I was always trying to meet students where they were. I would have students who wouldn't go to school for a year. It was almost a year. And it could be maybe they were just at home, maybe they were hospitalized, but they would have missed an entire school year. And if they needed to just work on touching the front door, then we just worked on touching the front door. And once we got really good at touching the front door, then we walked through the front door. And then when we got really good at walking through the front door, then we went into a classroom and we just built it up. We just built it up from there. And then I had students who didn't go to school for a year, but the second that they were in a setting where they weren't one of thousands, they had teachers that they could connect with, there was 10 students in a classroom versus 30 students in a classroom, they came every single day. And I could never tell you who was going to be the one who we had to work on just touching the front door versus who was the one who was just going to come to school every day. But regardless, they all came to school, and some of them just needed that tailored approach, and some of them just needed that change in setting, and it was instant. And I feel like once you show a student that you're willing to peel it back, like, you take all the demands away, right? when I was working with a school avoidance student, I took all the other demands, the academic demands, the demand of having to sit in a classroom, whatever demand had to be taken away, I stripped it down to the very bare bone minimum and said, let's start there and we'll build up. And then we did. We just built up. And eventually we get to a point where we're coming to school every day, we're sitting in class. But I didn't take you from 0 to 100 in one day. I let you
Hmm.
be the driver and let you get yourself there. And I think there was a little bit of empowerment that students could feel with that as well.
Okay.
And to me, that's how you get school avoidance students engaged and back. But a lot of it has to be that relationship piece too.
Hmm. A lot of times, kids that are especially in that school avoidance stage, throughout my life that I noticed at least, they don't really feel like a connection to anybody that like works at the school,
Yeah.
which kind of speaks to a point that within the last year has grown like really important to me. I feel like everybody, not just students, should at least visit with a mental health professional a few times a year, 2, 3 times a year, and just like sit down and have an honest discussion about like whatever's going on in your life, whatever you feel like you need to talk about, whatever. Because so oftentimes we sit and we think that everybody's like, oh, whenever something's wrong, I'll just talk to my parents. But there are a lot of kids,
Mhm.
a lot of people in general that don't have somebody that they can just sit and talk to and get like an honest feedback from in terms of how their life's going,
Yeah.
how their studies are going, what their dreams are, what they're feeling, just because they feel that like I'll be judged if I admit this. So do you think it would be more beneficial if we empowered school counselors to be able to do that, or if more people with like backgrounds like yourself were put in those positions?
I think that it is important, and I don't think it needs to matter what the background looks like. If they're a school counselor, if they're a school social worker, if there's someone like me with my background, I think just having someone is important. I think having opportunities for students to be able to talk to someone, if their family is not set up in such a way that they have their own outside provider, I think it's important for schools to be that gap. Every student by law has to go to school, right? So that's a
Hmm.
really big place that services can be provided because students are already there. And a lot of families can't afford the outside private providers. So let's make sure that there is individuals who are available to students in the school setting. And a lot of people, oh, well, that's why there's counselors. If you really knew what counselors are doing today, most counselors, especially in big districts, are doing scheduling. They are in charge of hundreds of students within and their caseload. And I am talking mainly on the high school level right now, but still at the elementary, there's typically one counselor there versus five or
Hmm.
six. So you have hundreds of students that you're responsible for. You're also typically responsible for students who have 504s. You're responsible for the scheduling of different students, like making sure they're in the right classes for graduation. So that doesn't really leave a lot of actual counseling time for these individuals, and most will say it doesn't, and they wish that that was something they could have more of in their day-to-day interactions with students. So that really shows that we need to have social workers or school psychologists who are not just there for testing purposes, because that's a lot of what school psychologists do, are doing testing and assessments on students. So really having individuals there who are there to listen to students, to help students take that 20-minute break or reset and get them back into class, but they help them process through what was ever going on or bothering them or impacting them or keeping them from being able to, or available to learn that day. And I think it's important because kids would come to school and they would have at least that connection or that trusted adult that they knew they could go and talk to and get that support from.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going to have to change so students can get that, or so counselors can have that ability, because I wasn't even thinking of that aspect of it. They're so bogged down by everything that they have going on, and they're being asked to fill so many roles, wear so many hats. It's hard for them to do like what they initially signed up for when they decided to do that.
Yeah.
um, how do we establish a process for identifying student mental health needs?
That's a really great question because I think that's often why students get overlooked. So I think the first process is teachers. And I think a little bit of it needs to be teachers need to just be taught what their own mental health looks like. And I think that's the way to teach them about what mental health is and what it looks like, is kind of by teaching them through, is this how you're feeling? Is this what you've experienced? Or think back to when you were a student, and giving them the knowledge that they need to recognize what mental health is. And then teaching them, okay, if you have a student who you know cognitively can do work at this level, but they're only producing work at this level, that's a red flag. That should be saying something to you. They're coming in and they're putting their head down on the desk and they're not engaging with peers. That's a red flag. If they're absent more than they're present, that's a red flag. So teaching teachers what some of these red flags are, and then what to do when they notice these red flags. Because I think that's the second piece that's kind of missing in the puzzle is, okay, I recognize it. I see something's not right, but what do I do with that? Am I supposed to go and talk to the student? Am I supposed to refer to it? What do I do with that information? I think there are some people who are naturally inclined and just kind of know, okay, I'm going to interact, I'm going to talk to them, I'm going to build this relationship, and I'm going to help out. But not everybody is naturally inclined to like that. And so you have to kind of say, when you see this, this is what you need to do. Here's the type of meeting you need to have. Here's how you need the referral that needs to be sent to this person, or let's teach you how to talk through with this student, or yes, this is your responsibility. No, it's not your responsibility. I think some people, like I said, are just more naturally inclined and just kind of intuitively know, and others don't. And we have to account for everybody's skill level and make sure that we're providing teachers with the knowledge and resources that they need to recognize and then act on students who are displaying any kind of mental health need.
Okay. Um, so wrapping up a little bit, how would you say we can help parent, or how can parents make sure that they're doing everything that they can to make sure that their students and their children are being put in that best position, besides what we've already talking about, like just making sure we're checking in on them and talking to them?
I think just being aware of who your child is, knowing what their needs are, talking with them, asking them for their feedback. I think a lot of times we forget to ask kids how they're feeling. We think as the adults, like we just know, and we don't get their feedback. So talk to your kid. How are they feeling? What would they change if school could look a certain way? What would that look like to them? Just be in communications with your teachers. If you feel like you're not getting enough feedback or information, talk to your child's teacher. How are they doing? What are you seeing? What's going on? Because I think oftentimes we're waiting for the school to reach out to us and let us know, hey, this is happening, or this is a concern, or this is a red flag. And there's so many parents that I've worked with who go, it was the end of the year before the teacher even told me this was happening or this was going on. And I think sometimes teachers get bogged down too in their day to day. And it's not that they're trying to be neglectful, but the amount of things that they are trying to juggle in the air, or the amount of students that they are trying to just keep tabs on. Like, if you, as I always tell, if you have mom gut, dad gut that's saying, like, oh, I think something's up, reach out, like, listen to that. Ask them, be direct, say, I have concerns. I want to hear what's going on. I want feedback. And don't feel like that you're being annoying or that you're being overly helicoptery. Like, if you're really concerned, don't be afraid to reach out and get some of that feedback on what's going on with your student.
Okay. Um, is there anything interesting you're reading these days?
Oh, I'm always reading interesting things. One of the biggest things that I've been reading right now is It Didn't Start With You, and it has to do with generational trauma. That's one of my biggest things that I've been on, and it just really talks about how sometimes some of the things that we're dealing with or we're struggling with didn't necessarily start with us or as an issue that was us. Sometimes the way we were parented has to do with the way our parents were parented, and we're still trying to kind of break through some of the traumas or the issues that were from generations ago, but we're still kind of dealing with the fallout from that. So that's always been a very interesting concept to me, and something that I think is
Mm.
important too.
Yeah, that is a really interesting topic that is definitely not talked about enough.
Yeah.
That is definitely not mentioned enough. Um, what is one conspiracy theory that you believe to be true?
Okay, so I'm gonna go down the neurodiverse tunnel again on this one. So
Ooh,
I
okay.
actually, I actually came up with this last night randomly, and I was telling my husband, I was like, what if all the neurodiverse individuals are actually really, really like the smart, like the evolved
Mm.
thinkers of the world, right? And the government knows that, and they are trying to create these disorders or these one size fits all situations, because they're actually trying to keep us from being able to make the change or bring into light some of the issues that are happening in the world right now. So that is my one conspiracy theory that I could get behind, that
Okay.
we have this whole generation of these really incredible thinkers who are being made to think that they're not, because people are scared of what they could come up with or what they could do.
That would be a really interesting novel if somebody were to write that.
Right?
Yeah. Um, do you have anything that you want to plug or anything?
I just encourage people to come check me out. I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram at the.neurodiverse.teacher. Same thing, www.theneurodiverseteacher.com. Come interact with me, talk with me. I love answering these types of questions. I love things that make me go hi and think of, I hadn't thought of
Mhm.
it like that before. That's an interesting thought. So I love that interaction and just kind of putting those thoughts and ideas out there.
Okay, and I'll make sure to plug or link everything into the show notes. Dr. Kristen Eccleston, thank you so much for joining me today, and
Thank
that is it
you.
for us.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Dominic Mills podcast. It was a pleasure to learn from Dr. Eccleston. If you like the show, please rate it 5 stars or leave a review on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you listen to this. Also, make sure to follow the show so you don't miss on any episodes, because we've got some real bangers coming up soon. But otherwise, that's going to be it for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you stay safe and stay curious.